So my name is Gabriel Lucille. I am the co-founder and general manager of Adel Ecosystem Limited. We are a blockchain incubator, and we're based in Central Europe. I'm not actually here to talk about Adel. I want to give you a little bit of perspective of the blockchain market. What I'd like to talk about is really how we got here from a cryptocurrency perspective. Why are we sitting here after 8 years of a white paper that was developed by Satoshi Nakamoto? And I would like to start by saying that Bitcoin is the first currency that is for the people, by the people, and of the people. This is a quote actually from Abraham Lincoln during the Gettysburg Address. He was talking about governance. And I'd like to borrow that statement in terms of cryptocurrency, because for the first time we really have a people's currency. So if we believe that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is a people's currency, then what is the next stage of the evolution of this market? And it comes down to an understanding of what I'm referring to as borders. As a tribal society, we have a tendency to create borders. We create economic borders, we have physical borders, we have borders to keep out our enemies. We also have borders in order to protect our markets. We create technological borders to prevent CDs or DVDs to be played across in other parts of the world, for example. And we have utility borders, so we can't use utilities in other parts of the world. So there is another part of society that really is interested in breaking down those borders, whether it's humanitarian, such as the UNICEF, we have the Judicial International Court of Justice, we have economic borders that are broken down, such as Schengen, and space military in general, and then we have standards which are used in order to unify the world so that we can interoperate from a standards perspective. So, as I mentioned, as a tribal society, we have this tendency to create borders, but we also have a part of society that wants to break down those borders. And Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is really all about breaking down those borders. Let's look at this from this perspective of technology. I present to you GPS and Iridium as one of the first technologies in the 70s and the 90s in order to break down borders from a location-based services of devices, and in terms of having global communications around the time that mobility came around, but really having the ability to have communications anywhere on the face of the earth. That Iridium, of course, was developed by Motorola. But these were centralized borderless technologies. In other words, if Motorola decided to bring down Iridium, then of course nobody has access. If the US government decides to turn off GPS, then nobody can use GPS anymore. And so these are centralized. So people came up, and also actually, as we know from history, that we came up with this idea of TCP/IP in order to have this decentralized communication of protocols, with one of the main goals of making sure that an enemy cannot break down the communication network in the time of war or crisis. So let's say around 1983. Then we have peer-to-peer networks, which became in the end of the 90s, as we know from Napster. Napster was a peer-to-peer implementation of trading music, for example, but it was based on a client-server type solution. It was peer-to-peer, but it's still client-server, in that if you brought down the server, which ultimately is what happened with Napster, then the whole peer-to-peer network was gone. So then somebody came up with BitTorrent in order to remove this notion of a server vulnerability or a centralized takedown aspect of the network, and purely have peer-to-peer communications. And of course we still use BitTorrent today. Even services like Skype, for example, uses peer-to-peer networks. So I propose that blockchain is just an evolution of this decentralized nature to prevent this ability for any central entity in order to break down these networks. And I like to refer to these as what we call pandemic protocols. Everything in red we like to refer to as pandemic, in the nature that it's decentralized, in the aspect of it being resilient, and almost to the point where those that created the protocol wouldn't themselves be able to break down or to tear down that infrastructure, right? So I was looking online when I was doing the research for this presentation, and I couldn't find a single term that would describe these networks. So we decided to put our own, which is what we're calling pandemic, in the same way that a virus is pandemic. And this is what we believe is the next generation of protocols moving forward. Decentralized, persistent, pervasive, omnipresent, and nobody individually can tear them down. Okay? So where does that take us now? If we look at the crypto industry, what can we do with these pandemic protocols? Can we control the crypto industry? Can a state, for example, control the cyberspace or the crypto space? And there are big challenges in order to do that. How far can crypto evolve? And is a virtual existence a trend for the future? So for the remainder of this presentation, I'd like to focus on these three areas of where potentially crypto is taking us and where it has taken us so far in this industry. Okay? So for us to understand whether a state can control crypto, we kind of come back to whether a state already controls cyber, right? Cyber in terms of the internet. And any state, whether it's a European state or a state in any country, we have to really define what a state is in order to understand how that compares to the crypto in the cyberspace. So a state is defined by a territory, by a population, by its relations with international organizations, and by its governance. So how does that compare to the crypto space? There is no territory, it's virtual. The population is anonymous, which makes it very difficult for a state to target individuals in crypto space of anonymous individuals, because then you can't find out who they are and prosecute them, for example, for what they're doing wrong. Communities are not based on international relations, they're really based on communities within the crypto space. And governance is what we call programmatic. We've moved this aspect of governing this space into code to minimize the vulnerabilities that we've created with people being involved. So let's do a little sanity check on what this governance has taken us. But really, to understand this aspect of governance, I'd like to define the power hierarchy of the real world to the crypto world. And this power hierarchy is just a layman's view of, let's say, a socioeconomic power hierarchy of the real world, and then really see how that has changed in the crypto space. In the real world, we have citizens employed by companies. So let's say companies control citizens. The banks control companies because banks give them money in order to finance their initiatives. And then I would propose that governments control banks and everybody else because they set the laws that everybody has to follow. Okay, so that is the top of this governance power hierarchy. So how does that compare to crypto? One thing we automatically see is there's no governments involved. There are no banks involved. At the top of this governance hierarchy are the coders. And I propose that to be the case because the coders create the rules, the programmatic rules that govern that blockchain in order for it to function. And let's say it's the Ethereum blockchain in terms of smart contracts. They develop the code on how smart contracts are being utilized. Then we have the miners that are mining that code. We have services like exchanges and other types of companies that are developed in that blockchain. And then, of course, the traders. But the other exclusionary aspect to this hierarchy are citizens. And I'm not referring to citizens here in this audience. I'm referring to citizens that don't understand technology, don't understand crypto, don't know what blockchain is. Maybe they heard about Bitcoin, but there is such a huge learning curve for them they're excluded from this hierarchy altogether. I think one of the presenters earlier said, there's like 3 million people that own cryptocurrency. How do we get that number to 30 million and 300 million and maybe 3 billion, right? So the power hierarchy is completely changed in the crypto space. So where are we in terms of code governance? So we do have code governance. We programmatically put the aspects of rules on how to use the blockchain. Satoshi Nakamoto, for example, prevented the double spending aspect of transactions, and of course there are many more rules that are in various different blockchains. But we have corruption, we have monopolies, we have fraud, we have billions of dollars, billions of euros that have been stolen in this crypto space. So why is this the case? Why hasn't this decentralized, omnipresent blockchain solved this notion of transactions and created this utopian world that we wanted to see with blockchain and the ideology of blockchain? So to answer that question, I'd like to come to something that we call system essentials. Again, I struggled to find online a term that described this pictorial, and it's really how we govern companies, how we govern our lives, how we govern almost many aspects of society, companies, governments. We need people, process, and technology, right? The people bring the innovation, the technology brings the resilience, and the process allows us to scale to many more zeros that we want in order to scale that solution. And in blockchain, we created this notion that technology and process can be programmed, okay? In the use of the blockchain code, we can process this governance in code. And as we saw from the previous slide, we have some issues, right? We have many issues in blockchain, and why is that the case? The reason is because people are not only the strongest link in terms of creating this code, but we're the weakest link as well. We're creating the weak link in adding new layers. So as we remove, for example, middlemen from the financial supply chain, we're creating new middlemen in exchanges and other types of blockchain services, which create new vulnerabilities, right? Mt. Gox is a classic example. I think there was 600 million stolen from Mt. Gox, which is now in the billions of dollars when you look at the current exchange rate. And that was simply because in order for that exchange to work, we needed to have that exchange control your private keys. So they had access to all the private keys for that exchange, and then we centralized the decentralized blockchain and created a vulnerability. Right? And that's the vulnerability in many exchanges today that are centralized. Right? So people have created this weak link in this equation, and that's one of the reasons why we still have issues in blockchain. So how do we move forward from here? And one aspect that I propose is what we don't do today in blockchain is that we don't look at cyber as a model for crypto. And in the cyberspace, this is a UNESCO proposition, for example, in governance, they call it multi-stakeholder governance, where the internet ultimately is governed with multi-stakeholders, whether it's international government organizations, non-government organizations, private enterprise, academic, technical community, and so on. We can argue that already this governance exists in the cyberspace, although it's not perfect. It's created the internet that we see today. What we face in crypto is this notion of this, again, this tribal society. My blockchain is better than your blockchain. Our cryptocurrency is better than yours. You know, I'm not going to talk to you because you are on a different blockchain. So we have this tribal society, and we're not working together because we're looking at blockchain as a tribe and not looking at blockchain as an aspect of bringing this into modern society, into scaling blockchain into the real world. And I think that will change our mindset if we say, look, you're not my enemy. We want to work together in order to bring the society and blockchain to a better world, right? So if that is the multi-stakeholder in cyber, then I propose this in terms of a multi-stakeholder in crypto. Again, to look at the future of crypto as a multi-stakeholder environment. Not to have any state having a unilateral approach to saying, you know, this is a law that you need to follow, these are the regulations you need to follow, but to really bring all the different parties that I showed in the previous slide around the table and have us discuss what the future of cyber can be, so that we have a consensus-based model instead of a dictatorship model of saying this is the laws that you need to follow in crypto, because that's not even going to work anyway. It's not going to work because we have anonymity, we don't have any borders, right? So already states struggle with the cyberspace, so how are they going to enforce laws in an aspect of anonymity in crypto? Right? So we need this consensus-based model, and we need to have standards that are based on consensus and not based on legally binding requirements to follow a certain standard. Okay? And a lot of standards already exist like that. The internet was based on consensus-based standards. And maybe we'll get to the point where we can start to chain blockchains and move away from this tribal approach to fighting between blockchains and saying, let's start chaining them together so that we can improve humanity. That brings us to what we call the borderless citizen. If I am selling you on this idea of where this market is going to take us into the future, then one aspect that we see already happening is this creation of this borderless citizen. We have these individuals already today that they live, they breathe, they eat in the real world, but everything else is in cyber. They educate themselves in cyber, they are employed in cyber, they get paid in cryptocurrency, and all of their existence is essentially in the cyberspace. And all they do is they work in this notion of cryptoversification. How can I take these real-world solutions that aren't doing very well because they're legacy, they're slow, these really long supply chains, and cryptoversify these solutions? Some of them will work, some of them won't. But those that will survive will be the leaders in crypto in the real world. And then there's this notion of a civil sovereignty. Civil sovereignty is this idea where we have this social freedom, which is all really about what crypto is about, is to have this individual prosperity, individual entrepreneurship, and the social freedom that is free from the constraints of Big Brother and governments, for example. So borderless citizen, we believe, is already happening today. Another aspect that I like to talk about is this ideology that already exists in cyber, and this is called Rome. This is also a UNESCO slide. Human rights, open tech opportunities, accessible to all, and multi-stakeholder engagements. And this is what we would like to bring to the crypto space as well. So we don't have to reinvent how to evolve crypto into the real world. It's already existing in cyber. We just need to adopt some of these standards as well, some of these ideas. So the ideology that I'm talking about is really what has driven crypto in the first place, right? No Big Brother, no assumed trust, proprietary systems, no middlemen, no centralized control, no single point of failure. These are all the ideologies that has driven the crypto space. And this is where the challenge is in combining the ideology of cyber to the crypto when we have these additional requirements. The last thing I want to talk about is this idea of a virtual state. So if I have sold you on this idea of a borderless citizen that already exists in the crypto space, what is the next level? Maybe it's this idea of you're going to check yourself out of the real world and go purely virtual, right? Maybe you've seen the movie Ready Player One, this virtual existence. So if we do go to virtual, then what are our virtual rights, right? If our individuality becomes an avatar, then what are the avatar rights? And then if our existence becomes fantasy, then what type of morals and ethics do we play into this world of anonymity and the other ideologies that I talked about in the crypto space? So what are we looking for in the future? What do you want as a crypto advocate? Are you looking for a utopian future? Do you want a dystopian future? Do you want monopolies? Do you want Big Brother? Do you want chaos? Do you want freedom? Do you want human rights protection, and so on? What we believe is that blockchain or crypto is not necessarily going to polarize us in terms of a utopian or dystopian future. We don't think that the blockchain or crypto is going to be any silver bullet, for example, in terms of solving humanity. We already see today that nothing is being solved in terms of utopian aspects of the future and dystopian. It's still going to apply moving forward. So I think it's really about a sanity check of expectations. So that's it, all I wanted to talk about. We are, as I mentioned, a blockchain incubator. We're based in Central Europe. Our first project, we have 14 projects. The first one is a decentralized crypto exchange, and we're launching that by the end of this year, called iFin. And thank you very much for listening.